Welcome to 1111. About a month ago, a very famous person died. And the first hours before everybody had talked it to death, my wife, who has never been a fan of 70s music as I have been, walked downstairs. Now, who died? I keep getting confused. Is it Prince or is it Queen? I said, well, Queen's a group. It was Prince. And I did ask her if I could share that, by the way. And she says, sure, but nobody's going to laugh. So some of you get it like that. But when somebody dies, the question that always follows, and this certainly happened with Prince, did they leave anything behind? Is there a vault? And of course, we heard with Prince, there's a huge vault because there's something about somebody's death. If we've appreciated them, we want to know, is there just a little bit more? There's something about those famous last words that can really grip us. They have more drama. And there are a lot of famous last words throughout history that have been recorded. Sometimes they can be words of regret. I think of Leonardo da Vinci. Some have said he is the most accomplished man ever as an inventor, as a thinker, as a painter. And yet he said, I've offended God and mankind because my work did not reach the quality it should have. Yeah, with the Mona Lisa, the Last Supper, you should try a little bit harder, Da Vinci. Maybe you would have gotten there. Sometimes the moment of death humbles even royal people. Louise, Queen of Prussia, who died in 1820, said, I am a queen, but I have not the power to move my arms. Sometimes it could be a little bit funny. Drummer Buddy Rich was being wheeled into surgery where he would die. And he didn't know these were his famous last words, but the nurse is going through everything, and she said to him, now, Buddy, is there anything you can't take? And his last words were this, yeah, country music. Or there's convicted murderer James Rogers, who was sentenced to be executed by a firing squad. And they said to him just before they let things go, do you have any last words? He says, yes, please bring me a bulletproof vest. Or there's General John Sedgwick, the commander of the Union forces in the Battle of Spotsylvania. As they were setting up their troops, bullets were still kind of flying from long away, and people would flinch, and he berated his soldiers. He said, don't be ridiculous. They couldn't hit an elephant at this I think one of my favorites is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, of course, who wrote the famous Sherlock Holmes stories. This is the way to go. He looks at his wife. He says, you were wonderful. Then he clutches his chest and dies. If I got to go out, that's how I want to go out. I want to go to the love of my wife. You're just wonderful. Not know that I'd want to have an instant heart attack like that, but it worked out poetically for him. And then there's just times of wonder. Stephen Jobs' sister, Mona, said that his last words were this, oh, wow, oh, wow, oh, wow. There's something about last words. They just take on that added importance. Because the last words are really what you think of as most important. When it's your last words, you're not saying, hey, what do you think we want to have for dinner tonight? Or, how's your 401k doing? Or how many Instagram followers you have? Those things you don't care about. You're getting down to the root issues of what drives you and what makes you believe this is most important. And that's why throughout the centuries, the church has often emphasized the last words of Jesus. We're wrapping up our year-long series on the Autobiography of God by looking at the 7 last words of Jesus. Now, they're actually the last phrases of Jesus. Each phrase has a word that speaks of it. None of the Gospels record all of the last words. You have to put the Gospels together to get them. But the church recognized these are just particularly crucial words. They're the words that Jesus gave us just before he died. And what I love about this process is that it puts us on the cross. I found this painting. It was by a French painter a couple hundred years ago in the 19th century. It's the only one I could find. It's the picture of Jesus, what he would have seen looking out at the crowd. It's research. He'd look, what did they wear? Who are the kind of people who would be there? Because most pictures of the crucifixion, of course, they're pictures of Jesus, looking up at Jesus. But he's saying, what was Jesus's view? And if you look in the expressions of those faces, you can see some of them are expectant, like, Man, he had such power when he taught. He spoke like no one else. Can he give us just a little bit more? They didn't know there was going to be a Bible. They didn't know how everything would be recorded. And so I think there are just a few hungry souls left over. I mean, most of the men had deserted him, but there are some faithful women who are saying, maybe he can just give us a few more tidbits because there has never been a teacher like him. But then we can also, looking at this painting, we can see the picture of Jesus. Looking at some people who hated him, some people who feared him, some people who revered him and even worshiped him. And you're thinking, he knows what's about to happen. And he's thinking, what do I need to say? If ever there was a time in Jesus' life when he is focused, he knew these words would be recorded. He knew they would be written down. He knew they would be shared. So he's thinking, what does the church really need to know as I speak from the cross? Maybe some of you have heard of those red letter edition Bibles. Theologically, I don't like what they represent. I think all the words of Scripture are inspired. But the last words of Jesus shouldn't just be in red, like the red letter Bible. I don't know what's a better color than red, maybe purple or blue or something. But these should have even a higher note of importance because they're Jesus' very last words. And the one we're going to look at today is the first word of Jesus on the cross, and it's a word of forgiveness. Luke 23:34, Jesus says this, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. And when you think about this, you kind of want to say, of course. What else would Jesus say? He's literally in the act of dying to make this word possible. He's dying so that he could speak words of forgiveness. It makes perfect poetic sense. Perfect theological sense, perfect relational sense that he's saying, Lord, forgive them even as he's dying to make it possible. Now, here's where it has to come down for us. As this was one of the most precious truths for Jesus, the first thing he uttered on the cross, so it must become one of the most precious words to us. It should never become a word that we're callous to. It should always be a word that moves us at the depths of our souls, because when you think about it, without forgiveness, we are toast. Let me put it this way. Imagine a world where washing isn't allowed. No soap, no shampoo, no gel, none of that stuff. So you get dirty, you stay dirty. You go for a run, you literally wear that run the rest of your life. You work on cars, you get greasy. Well, the grease is going to stay on there. That's just who you are. Women, you apply makeup in the morning, you don't get to take it off at night. Imagine what that would be like, wearing mascara from your senior high prom, still on your eyes. Imagine tasting that juicy fruit lip gloss from when you were 10 years old. It's still there. That's what life would be without washing. It sounds horrendous, doesn't it? Now imagine a world without forgiveness. There's no do-overs. Nobody's allowed to give you a second chance. You're called to account as soon as you mess up. If you sin against a friend, you lose that friend. Would any of us have any friends left? You sin against your parents, you get kicked out of the house. Every kid would be homeless. You sin at school, you're kicked out of school just once. The graduating class would be 2 or 3 kids. And the kind of kids nobody would want to hang around anyway. You make a mistake at work, you get fired. We'd all be unemployed. Imagine how awful life would be, how intolerable this world would be if there was no forgiveness. Now, earlier in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus said there's something worse than a world without forgiveness, and it's an eternity without forgiveness. It's an eternity without forgiveness. Luke 13:28, he says, of those who experience eternity without forgiveness, in that place, there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And Jesus on the cross, if you don't know who Jesus is, this is so key for you to understand. Jesus on the cross is saying, Father, I don't want anyone to go to that place without forgiveness. It is not my desire that a single person live in eternity without forgiveness. And there will be a moment You may not believe me. I believe it to be true. I believe the Bible makes it so clear when every one of us will be face to face with our Creator. And we will realize at that moment what mattered most in this life was not the house we lived in, not how happy our marriage was, not how successful our kids might have been, not how many fun times we did or how we filled up every Friday night. That won't seem very important at all. Those famous last words, what we will want more than anything, we will believe it was the most important thing we could get in this world, and it wouldn't be money, and it wouldn't be fame, and it wouldn't be Pinterest followers. It would be forgiveness. We'll come to the point where, Lord, I just need forgiveness. And the word on the cross tells us it's not just what we'll need in eternity, it's what we need now. Because having forgiveness now, being forgiveness people now, changes the way we look at ourselves. It dramatically impacts the way we look at ourselves, and it dramatically impacts the way we treat others. This might seem bizarre to some of you, but I would say throughout my life, what I have tried hardest at, more than I've tried at my marriage, more than I tried at parenting, more than I tried at running or writing or anything, I've wanted to live a holy life. And I've tried, I've studied, I've read, and I know that seems like, Gary, what a stupid life. But if you think that, you don't know what holiness means. I'm not talking about trying to obey all the rules. You can see this show, not that show. You can eat or drink this, not drink that. You can't say these words. That's human stuff. I'm talking about the holiness of Christ, where no one can make me hate them because I look at them through the eyes of Jesus. I feel with the heart of Jesus. I think about others with the mind of Jesus. And I'm not a slave to my passions. I'm a slave to the surrendered will of God, because I don't believe any of us will know who we are until we pursue holiness, because holiness is what frees us up to be who God created us to be. Sin is pollution. Sin is stain. Sin is vandalism. You don't know the glorious person God created you to be unless you're trying to walk in holiness. You just don't. But the problem when you try so hard at holiness, if you're like me, the problem when I live and try so hard to live a holy life, I'm just not very good at it. I burn through forgiveness like a rocket ship burns through fuel on takeoff. When tons and tons of fuel is being consumed trying to get that rocket off the ground, I feel like it takes more than that spiritually for God to forgive me, even when I try so hard. But for those of you who are serious about your faith, and you don't think what I said was silly, you think it's like an invitation, here's why you need to remember forgiveness even more than you remember the pursuit of holiness. Forgiveness is what keeps us sane when we fail. I want to be a better husband than I am, and if I keep failing, I'm going to say, it's not possible. I'm just going to give up. I want to be a better dad. I keep messing up. It's just not possible. I want to be a better friend. I want to be a better employee. It's not possible. I would just give up. I would go insane because I've tried harder than I can, and I still can't get there. So forgiveness keeps us sane, and it keeps us connected. It means we don't have to lose those relationships when we mess up. It means there's a pathway back. And that's the central message of Christianity. If you ask most people on the street, what's the message of Christianity? I bet a lot of people would say the 10 Commandments. Seems like that's what we fight for, right? That's what we petition about and whatnot. The 10 Commandments are not even close to the central message of Christianity. And some might be more enterprising. Well, maybe it's the New Testament, right? The Sermon on the Mount. That's the message. No, it's not. Maybe it seems a little closer, but it's not. And it's not even the parable of the prodigal son. The central message of Christianity is the cross. It's the word of forgiveness that no matter how you try, no matter how high you climb, you cannot get there on your own. Every one of us will need forgiveness. That's the message. We can't do it on our own. God did it for us. 2 Corinthians 5:21. This is the verse. This is our hope. This is what keeps us waking up. This is what comforts us and allows us to sleep at night. God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. And we can breathe because that verse is true. And you can't send it away. Jesus is on the cross speaking that word of forgiveness to people who are literally trying to kill him. Think about this. If you don't know Jesus, this is why we love him so much. He's praying for those who are putting him to death to be forgiven while they're trying to kill him. It's amazing. And this is where I'm so pathetic as a believer. I can get critical. I can get cynical as people attack Christians. And it's a sin I keep falling into. But Jesus tells us they're not the enemy. All right? There are other things going on. There are other spiritual truths. Jesus is dying to save the very ones who are putting him to death, and I should give my life to bring salvation to the very ones who might be ridiculing or persecuting God's church. Now, this not only goes against my human nature, it goes against how we look at ourselves as Texans. Right? Now, I'm just an adopted Texan. 6 years I've been here in Texas, and my dad, though, grew up in Texas, so I've got a little bit of blood there. But do we have any, like, born and bred, you are proud to be a Texan, you wear that star, right? Raise your hand, all right, keep it up, all right? Because I know if you're a Texan and you take pride in being a Texan, I can say 2 words, and you're gonna complete the sentence. You will say the 3rd word, all right? This is what you do, all right? You're a Texan, this is what you do. Now, you just gotta say it. I want you to think about it. I want you to try to figure it out. This is visceral, all right? If you're a Texan, I'm going to say 2 words, and you complete my sentence, and it's not going to work unless you say it out loud, and you say it out immediately. If you're a Texan, you hear these 2 words. Remember the... That's Texas, right? We know what they did. They messed us over. They're going to get theirs. We're Texans, right? Jesus, I'm sorry, but Jesus is saying, remember their sins no more. For Jesus, as hard as this will be for you Texans, it's not remember the Alamo, it's remember no mo. I know, that's not bad. I'm glad you're being kind. It's not remember the Alamo, it's remember no mo. Because before we're anything, before we're Texans, we're Christians, and this is what Jesus is saying it means. And why? How does he get there? He says, forgive them, for they know not what they do. His prayer is asking for mercy because he realized, yeah, they knew they were killing him. Many of them knew he was innocent. Many of them knew it threatened them. But what Jesus is saying is, Lord, they don't really understand the root issues, why they're doing it. And I would suggest every sin I commit, every sin you commit is a sin of ignorance. We think it's about preserving our power. We don't understand that life is about giving up our power. We think this is going to still the ache. We don't realize it's going to create the ache. We think this is what I need to be happy. We don't realize it's assaulting our happiness. If you think about it, every sin is birthed in ignorance because the truth of God is he wants you to have the best life. He wants you to have the most fulfilling life. He wants you to have the happiest life. And so when we sin, we're believing a lie. And Jesus is saying, for someone to do this, they're believing a lie. And Lord, I want you to bring them to a place of understanding. Now, ignorance still makes us guilty. Leviticus 5 talked about how they had to offer sacrifices for sins they didn't even know they were committing. So we're still accountable. My wife and I were in Germany a couple years ago and got to drive the Autobahn. And it's so confusing because obviously I don't speak German and the signs are just different. This is a traffic sign on the Autobahn. That means something, as does this. And it's different when it's a red circle, but when it's faded and has lines, it means something different. And figure this one out. What's the speed limit there? And then you've got all these other signs that are so confusing because you don't understand the language. We saw this next sign every 1 or 2 kilometers. It was everywhere we saw it. It means exit. And those of you who are laughing are not being culturally sensitive, all right? It's pronounced Usfert, okay? It's about exit. So don't lose me here. So you're just confused. You see the signs, you don't understand. And they have electronic monitors. You don't always get pulled over. And so when we got back from Germany, there was a ticket waiting for us in the mailbox. I'd missed something. And I can't go to a German court and say, well, look, I don't know German. I didn't know what the sign meant. I was guilty. I'm accountable. We had to pay it. They got our credit card. But Jesus isn't like that. He's not like the Germany Autobahn. He's not saying, I'm going to catch you. I'm going to make it difficult for you to understand. In fact, Jesus, this is what is so incredible. Jesus isn't trying to catch us. He wants to forgive us. He's not about condemnation. His last word, his first word of the last words is about healing. In fact, this is what is so amazing about Jesus. This is why we worship him. He is literally saying, I am dying for you in advance so that when your ignorance falls away, you can be forgiven. I don't think you fully realize what you're doing, so I'm going to die right now. And when the day comes and you see the truth, there will be a path for forgiveness because I've died for you in advance. That's the stretch of Jesus' love. He doesn't want his followers to be vengeful. He doesn't want them to kill others. He could have been saying to those on the cross, like, go tell the disciples, this one has to pay. This one has to pay. This one, don't you see what he did to me? Don't let him live. Jesus could have said that, but he said, no, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He knew the disciples would hear his last words. He knew it. And how do I know the disciples heard it? Because Peter's first sermon in the book of Acts, his very first sermon, Acts 3, look at what he said. You handed him, preaching to the Jews, you handed him over to be killed. Now, fellow Israelites, I know that you acted in ignorance, as did your leaders. Peter preached, giving them the benefit of the doubt. God came to remove our ignorance. We're not here to be vengeful. We're not here to pay you back. You acted in ignorance, but now that you know, you're going to respond. And that giving them the benefit of the doubt led to 3,000 decisions on that day. One day, 3,000 people responded to the gospel because Jesus created disciples who lived by that. But the problem is with the church today, when people look at the church today, we don't give people the benefit of the doubt. We give them the certainty of our condemnation, don't we? We're more concerned they know how much we condemn them than we know that they're acting in ignorance. And there's a better life they can live. And this will destroy our marriages. It destroys all of our relationships. I think of two of my friends, Brian and Diane, have been married over 2 decades. They got pregnant a couple months after they got married. They were both very young, hadn't been married very long, and they're walking through a mall. Diana is 8 months pregnant, all right? 8 months pregnant and feeling it. They're walking through the mall, and a very lithe, athletic blonde woman, Diana's blonde, but a very lithe, athletic blonde woman walks by the two of them. And Brian looks at her, turns to Diana, says, dang, forgot how pretty you are when you're not pregnant. Yeah, he said that, all right? And they're still married, all right? They're still married. Here's how they're still married. This is the brilliance of Diana in giving her husband the benefit of the doubt. Here's what she said. Brian's heart had no malice. He actually believed he was giving me a compliment. He was completely caught off guard when I began to sob uncontrollably. He had no idea what was wrong. I cherished Brian by knowing his character, which allowed me to recover quickly and laugh about this for years to come. Brian thought he was cherishing me by comparing me to a beautiful girl that reminded him of me 8 months earlier. His words got all mixed up and they came out wrong. Now there's great teaching for younger wives. A young bride may not have the capacity to understand the thoughts of a young husband. Everything is so new. But she can cherish him by giving him the benefit of the doubt. Would Brian ever have said something to me like that to be intentionally cruel and hurtful? Not a chance. He was trying to compliment me. It took me a few minutes to realize that, but now this is a fun memory, not a bitter one. And that's what happens when forgiveness enters a marriage. When a wife does that to a husband, when a husband does it to a wife, because we married people who are messed up with the past. One blogger shared how she got married. She'd had a lifetime struggle with food addictions. And right before she got married, she realized that the job she was in, rather high profile, paid very well, was probably not most conducive to a good marriage. So she took another job that didn't pay quite as much, wasn't quite as high profile, but she thought it would just be better for their marriage. So when they got married, there was a lot of stress about money and reorienting with a new job and the new identity. And then because of other things in her past, the whole thought of physical intimacy was not an exciting one to her. It was a threatening one. She knew it was going to be difficult and there were going to be some challenges and things she had to overcome. And so rather early on, when her husband was getting frisky and she knew, okay, this is going to go down, everything from her past came up. The fear about money, the fear about a new position, all of the concerns about intimacy, everything, it just started screaming at her, this is bad, this is wrong, everything's in a panic. And she remembered what eased the pain in the past. And so she said to her husband, fine, but look, I just got to go to the bathroom. He said, okay. But she didn't go to the bathroom. She went to the kitchen. She opened it up, and if it was edible, she put it in her mouth. She found a box of noodles, takeout Chinese, and she's putting the noodles in her mouth, and she senses a presence behind her. She turns, literally, noodles out of her mouth, and she sees her husband. Imagine the shame, the fear. God was past this. Now he's seeing me at my worst. I never wanted him to see this. But her husband was smiling. Went to a drawer, got out a fork. He sat down at the table. You don't have to do this alone anymore. We're married now. I'm with you. See, forgiveness brings life. I'll take your past. I'll marry your past. We're going to face this together. I have seen marriages survive affairs. I've seen them survive childlessness or the death of a child. I've seen them survive unemployment, depression, you name it. I've never seen a marriage survive a lack of forgiveness. It can't. And it's not just in marriage, it's in parenting. Maybe you've heard the story of the prodigal son. Have you heard the story of the prodigal Paco? It's the name of a young man in Madrid about 100 years ago. Paco was a very popular name in Madrid about 100 years ago. It's the shortened name for Francesco. And Paco and his father had a big falling out. Ernest Hemingway tells us in his story, The Capital of the World. And they had a big falling out, and so the son said, fine, I don't need you. I'm going to get my own way. And then getting a job wasn't so easy, so he decided to enroll in a bullfighting school, which most of those guys died. I mean, a few made it to the glamorous top, but the fatality rate was off the charts. Is every parent's nightmare that their kid would go into one of those schools. And so Paco was there. His father couldn't find him. Those schools were everywhere. He searched all over Madrid. He didn't want his son to do this. He didn't want the estrangement to go that far, and he couldn't reach him. So he finally took out an ad in the newspaper, El Liberal. And the ad said this: Paco, meet me at the Hotel Montana at noon on Tuesday. All is forgiven. Love, Papa. When he went there at noon on Tuesday, the police were all over. 800 Pacos showed up, all hoping it was their dad who was saying, all is forgiven, all is well. Parenting is not possible without forgiveness. I think one of the things that someone has said has touched me more than anything was my daughter, who came back after her first year of college. My oldest daughter, she went to a Christian college up in Canada. Like me, she's a big introvert. It's not easy for her to meet new friends, and at times she could feel a little bit alienated. And she said the one thing that made her feel better is that she would go into their bookstore, and she'd find one of my books, and she'd look at the picture on the back and just read a few paragraphs. She got my voice. It just made me feel a little bit better. It was like a little hug. I felt like, here's where I come from. When your kids go away, as they will, and they think of your home, is it a place where they're not accepted? Is it a place where if they don't measure up, they pay the price? Or is it the place where this is their refuge when a world rejects them? Or is it a place where they're not accepted at home, so they're going to find somebody else to accept them out in the world? Parenting isn't possible without forgiveness. Forgiveness makes community, it makes family, it makes friendship, it makes a church possible. And as much as I have prayed that God would help me grow in holiness, I do believe, I know for sure, the first word he will speak to me in eternity. Because he knows I'm insecure. He knows I always have been. I don't deal with a lot of doubt because he's made himself so real to me, but I deal with my insecurities. And I believe the first word I'll hear God speak will simply be this: forgiven. Because he knows I won't hear anything else until I hear that word. There'll still be that's what I need. He's just going to say forgiven because he knows I can't hear anything else until I hear that word, because I know it's what I'll need most. I'm like that young man who falls in love with a woman larger than life. He adores her. She's his dream. And maybe he pushes it. Maybe it's a little too soon, but he just has to know he wants to propose, and he doesn't think she's expecting it, so he just lets it out. He's got to know, will you marry me? She's shocked. She didn't see it coming. But she says, yes. He doesn't hear anything the rest of the day. She's talking about where they're going to get married, when, what they're going to do, where the home is. He doesn't hear any of that. She gave him a test. He would score 5% at the end of the day. Not because he doesn't care, but because he cares so much. He can't believe he heard that one word, yes. That's all he wanted to hear. Jesus' first word on the cross, I believe our first word we're going to want to hear in heaven, is that one word that is so overwhelming. It's everything we need to be received and to receive others. That one word, to hear God say, forgiven, and to say to others, forgiven. Forgiven.